book of Ecclesiastes is a unique book in the Bible that has delighted and confused Christians throughout the years. Where Scripture relies on ancient wisdom as core to understanding God's world, Ecclesiastes bases its wisdom off of experimentation.
There's no other book like it where you have this first-person voice who's telling you about a lifetime's worth of experiment. The book stage is a big experiment where I tried this and I went and learned about this and then here's what I concluded.
The conclusion of Ecclesiastes is that life is hevel. Hevel, hevel, everything is hevel. And while modern translations typically translate that Hebrew word into the word meaningless, in Hebrew, it's literally the word for smoke or vapor.
Smoke is real. Like when you see it, a cloud of smoke, you look at it and go, oh, that's a thing. Look at it. I can see it. I can point at it. But smoke has this unique quality that when I reach out my hands to grab onto it, there's nothing there.
This metaphor that life is like smoke is lost in the translation that life is meaningless.
Because what the teacher isn't saying is, I know all the answers, and I declare to you that life is meaningless. What he's saying is, I've discovered there's a glitch in the system, and things that I thought were certain and true aren't always certain and true.
Hevel, hevel, everything is hevel.
He uses the word 38 times in this short 12-chapter book. Michael Fox, my doctoral advisor, he thought the best English word to capture it is absurd. Or I've come to prefer the word enigma or paradox.
The Wisdom of Ecclesiastes, the second book in our wisdom series. Let's go. Okay, so Ecclesiastes. Let's first tee this up. Let's refresh on Proverbs so we can compare the wisdom of the Proverbs to the wisdom of Ecclesiastes. So Proverbs is this nice kind of clean worldview, which is be wise, fear the Lord, and things are going to go well.
Things are very likely to go well. So much so that, Lady Wisdom or the father figure in Proverbs can say, trust the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. Be wise, fear the Lord, and it'll be health to your bones, and your barns will be full of crops, and you'll live long days and have a big family.
That sounds great.
Who doesn't want that?
Yeah. So do the right thing, and things will work out for you well. Which, by the way, is the worldview I grew up in. Like, there's a right and wrong decision at any moment. Do the right thing, and things will go well for you.
Yeah. And Proverbs has a really valuable contribution to the Bible's wisdom literature. We can probably all, from our own life experience, validate that when we make wise decisions, they usually go better.
It's wise to be wise.
It's wise to be wise.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of self-evident after you've lived for a little while.
But then we get to the book of Ecclesiastes, and there's this massive turn here.
Yeah.
Put some brakes on Proverbs.
Yeah, and it may be that there are some cynics or skeptics when they are listening to the Proverbs saying, well, okay, I get it. And sure, that's true a lot of the time, but it's not necessarily true all the time. I remember that time I saved up and then the stock market crashed.
Right.
Or I remember...
I made all the right decisions.
Yeah, I did all the right things.
My CPA gave me a checklist, and I did it all.
Yeah, sure.
Or my tax my advisor.
Yeah,
my wealth advisor.
I worked hard and saved up and went to college.
Yeah.
Put in my years, and I got this degree, and I can't get hired anywhere.
Right.
What's up with that?
The wise thing doesn't always work out. And part of that is because it's hard to know exactly what the wisest thing always is. There's conventional wisdom, go to college, save for retirement, whatever. But then in the Proverbs, there's wisdom that should be universal, that you should be able to depend on.
Yeah.
But even with that stuff.
Yeah, that's right. I was always honest at work.
Yeah.
You know?
I'm supposed to be honest.
Be honest. That's part of fearing God. So I'm always honest at work. And you know what? I lost out.
It bit me in the butt. It reminds me, I was working at Starbucks, and I was applying to be a shift manager. And so I was meeting with the district manager and the manager of my store, getting interviewed. And the last question was, give me an example of a time that you made a wrong decision on the job. The first thing that came to mind was the day before we're closing up and you're supposed to clean the bathrooms. And there's this whole list of things to do. And there's always like 3 people cleaning up. So I went to go to the bathroom right before we're going to leave. And the bathroom's a mess. So the girl who was supposed to do it didn't do it. And I was like, well, who cares? And then we left. And so I'm sitting here across from the district manager, and she's asking me like when I made a mistake, and I said, "Oh, well, a couple days ago." And I tell her, and she looks at me and she goes, "You did what?" I mean, she was shocked.
Yes.
She was like, "You I
walked
can't
away?
believe you didn't fix that." And then I was like, "Oh no, I'm not going to get this job."
It makes me think of, I was recently talking to a friend who works in home real estate here in Portland, which is really hot market right now.
Yeah.
And she was saying she quit one group, one company, and moved to another. Basically, she just said, I wasn't cooking the numbers on listings and listing houses for more than what they're worth or less than what they're worth or changing the number of rooms and so on just to get people in the house.
Oh. And then be like, "Oh,
And
that was a mistake."
Yeah, totally. Yes. But all of her coworkers, like that's just what you do.
You
You change the data on the real estate listing to get people
interested.
into the house.
Oh my goodness.
And she wasn't getting promoted. She wasn't getting as much business or sales. So
Oh,
she
wow.
actually had to quit. So there's an example
Yeah.
of someone who lost out because they were fearing the Lord
Yeah.
and not.
So that's a better example than mine. Because I got the job.
Yeah,
But
right. So it's just 2 examples to say you try and do the right thing, and sometimes it does work out, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
And Proverbs doesn't seem to account for that glitch in the system.
Right.
And so Ecclesiastes is a voice among the 3 wisdom voices in the Hebrew scriptures that says, hey, wait a minute, Proverbs, you're going too fast too soon. Like, do you see all of these other examples where what you're saying doesn't work out?
Right.
And what about those? Let's focus on those.
Yeah.
And can we draw conclusions from them? And maybe life isn't as clean as we like to think it is.
Ecclesiastes doesn't do it in like it goes for the jugular.
Yeah.
It's like, let's throw down.
Yeah. Proverbs, you've overreached.
So
Yeah.
that's fascinating. And then so your comment earlier was, hey, this book's in the Bible. Isn't that funny? So like, tell me about that. Like it doesn't seem, the way that it goes for the jugular and the way that it kind of deconstructs so many things, it feels very different
Yeah.
than most other books.
Yeah, it is. It has a different feel. There's no other book like it where you have this first-person voice who's telling you about a lifetime's worth of experiment. The book's staged as a big experiment where I tried this and I went and learned about this and then here's what I concluded. Whereas Proverbs receives the wisdom of the ages from generations past. That's what we talked about. But Ecclesiastes is basing his conclusions on experimentation, innovating new ideas based off of experiment. My doctoral advisor, Michael Fox at the University of Wisconsin, he's retired now, but he is a Jewish scholar. He was in his late 60s when I was with him for about 4 years, working closely with him. And he wrote commentaries on all the wisdom books, Job, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes. And his most brilliant one was on Ecclesiastes. And his way of framing it is, for Proverbs, you know it's true because it's ancient and old and has been tested. And Ecclesiastes innovates in the biblical tradition because he says, you know it's true because you've tested and examined it here in the present. And he thinks in the wisdom books, it marks a new point of maybe just because it's old doesn't mean it's true.
Yeah.
And that's unique in the Bible. There's not many other books that say something like that.
Right. Well, and then also it deconstructs a lot.
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
It's asking a lot of questions and doesn't have simple answers, and which is, that seems different than most other books.
Yeah. It is. Yeah. He's the teacher. Yeah. He's relentless in taking apart simple black and white views of God and views of the world and how life ought to work. teacher's voice that makes up most of the book is not the author's voice.
Right.
The author of the book speaks in the first line, introducing us to the teacher. But then,
Verse 1:1.
Yep, in chapter 1, verse 1. And then in chapter 1, verse 2, the teacher takes over until nearly the end of chapter 12. But the last paragraph of the book is not from the teacher we've been hearing. It's from the author.
Yeah.
And the author says positive things about what you just heard from the teacher, but he also warns you.
He critiques the criticism.
He critiques the criticism. And then the author's conclusion at the end sounds like Moses, fear God, obey the laws
It's
of
a
the
little bit
Torah.
more in line with the narrative so far.
Yeah, with what, you could call it biblical orthodoxy or
Right.
something. So to me, that's absolutely fascinating that this biblical author, who's anonymous, wants us to hear at length this very critical, skeptical voice.
Yes.
And is willing even
Just
to
lets him go for 9
lets
chapters
him
or
run. And at the end wants to say, now, let's bring this in line with the larger biblical theology, but you really need to hear what this guy has to say.
Right.
It's a way of hedging a little bit on the teacher and saying, don't take this too far. You can read books all your life and make them even, and you won't get anywhere. It'll just exhaust you, he says.
Yeah.
So don't take these words too far, but let them bother you and stick in your mind so that you aren't shattered when your life doesn't work out for you.
So interesting.
Yeah, so that brings us to who is the teacher? And the author's intro just says he was a king in Jerusalem and a descendant from the line of David.
Right.
Which makes you think, okay, Solomon,
Right.
he's a wise man, And traditionally, this book has been, in Jewish and Christian tradition, been connected to Solomon in his old age. Because, he's old and wise and he's done a lot and seen a lot. But there's some problems with that. One is that Solomon in his old age was apostate and, had hundreds of wives and political alliances and worshipped all kinds of other gods. And this seems a very unlikely book to come from the Solomon of his
What
old age.
would you imagine Solomon having written in his old age?
I mean, just the biblical depiction is that his allegiance was given to many gods now, in addition to Yahweh, the God of Israel.
Yeah.
So I've never quite had that question put to me that way. I don't know off the top of my head. I don't know. I actually would need to think about that question a little more. But it raises what's very interesting. When the book of Proverbs, it begins saying the Proverbs of Solomon.
Right.
And it goes on to give you a bunch of speeches from an anonymous father to his son, and then from Lady Wisdom. Then you get a collections of Proverbs, most of which have, again, the heading Proverbs of Solomon. But the last number of chapters have new headings that just say these are Proverbs that come from the wise ones, or from Agur, or from Lemuel, what his mom taught him. And so you have a book that's titled and connected to Solomon, but it tells you in it, the book itself, that not all of this comes from Solomon.
Right.
So here we have another book that gives you a hint of a royal Solomon-like persona, but it never says that in the book. It never says Solomon in the book.
Yeah.
And so you can say, well, it just assumes it's Solomon, or you can say, no, there's something more happening here. That it's conspicuous by its absence.
Sure.
That the book doesn't say Solomon. It just says a king in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
From long ago, which raises the possibility: is this a later king, or are we almost creating like an icon of the wise voice,
right?
The father of the wisdom tradition, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it was historically written by Solomon itself, because we know the teacher is not the same as the author of the book.
Right. So the author somehow came across these writings that he knew came from a king that was the son of David. And by that could literally mean there was a king. It could have been Solomon, could have been another one of the sons of David that was king at some point, who actually wrote this, and the author compiled it. Or it could mean in the tradition of the wisdom of the kings.
Yeah, similar to the Song of Songs.
Yeah.
Which says of Solomon, but that doesn't necessarily mean it was written by Solomon. In fact, there are lots of good reasons that it most likely wasn't written by Solomon.
Right, and so he just was using the kingship kind of regardless of how this was actually written. I mean, that's a possibility.
Yeah, it would be an anonymous teacher in Jerusalem or Israel,
Writing
much
in
like
the tradition.
writing in the tradition of Solomon and writing from his persona. There's an Old Testament scholar named Tremper Longman who did his whole dissertation that's published now on this, and it's something like Akkadian royal autobiographies or something like that. And Akkadian's a language that's a cousin language to Hebrew. But he was studying in ancient Babylon. This was a genre of writing from the king's court. There would be hired a scribe or a wise teacher to write a book
In the first person,
as if it's from the king's perspective.
Yeah.
And so this was a type of book that people wrote in the ancient world, and it fits precisely what we see in the book of Ecclesiastes.
So the author gets this kind of regardless of who wrote it. It's presented as this is the words of the son of David.
The words from the royal wisdom tradition.
Yeah.
In Israel. It's also funny. There's another small detail that I've always thought was interesting. In chapter 1, verse 16, the teacher says to himself, "Look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled in Jerusalem ever before me. Out of all the rulers of Jerusalem ever before me." And you're like, "Oh, well, my dad."
My dad. Sorry, Dad. And Saul.
Well, but he didn't rule in Jerusalem because David made Jerusalem the capital.
Okay.
We could be wrong about this. It could come from Solomon. I just think there are reasons that make it.
It's okay
unlikely.
if someone comes and says, and probably isn't Solomon. You don't have to freak out and go.
Yeah.
Well, my worldview of the Bible or my
understanding
the Bible is
something. Yeah.
Shattering.
Yeah. If you really get into the book itself, you realize that tying this to one specific person as the author, it doesn't matter for the interpretation of the book, really. Sure. You just get into the words and interpret the words that come from the royal wisdom tradition of David. Here's how the book begins. So the words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. That's the author speaking to us. And then the author summarizes everything the teacher has to say in just one line.
This is kind of like when the keynote speaker is being introduced.
Yeah, that's right.
It's just a quick little...
Yeah, it's like the MC of the room introduces the speaker and then says, here's
his main deal.
Here's his main idea.
Yeah. Enjoy.
And right off the bat, we face a translation problem. So in the New International Version, the author's summary is meaningless is what the teacher says.
Yeah.
Utterly meaningless, everything's meaningless. Mm-hmm. But if I turn to the New American Standard Version...
What was that version was that NIV?
That was the New International Version, NIV, yeah. If I turn to the New American Standard, NAS, I read vanity of vanities. Everything is vanity.
So meaningless, to me, there's no meaning, so there's no reason behind any of this.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have surveyed, and here is my authoritative conclusion. There is no meaning.
There is no meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And then vanity seems to be like, all of this is just an exercise in futility. I don't know. Actually, I haven't thought about the vanity much. What is? I never use that word.
Well, I
except
think
for if you're vain.
That's exactly right. So I think that's the problem. In modern English, the way we speak it in 2016, the word vanity has two main meanings.
Arrogance and stuff.
Yeah, it means like self exaltation and pride.
Yeah.
Or it's a little table you sit at to put on cosmetics.
Right. Which then speaks to caring how you look.
That's self-focused.
Yeah,
so
self-focused.
Yeah.
And so life is self-focused.
Right. Which is not at all what is meant here. And part of that is that the translation vanity comes from the King James from English 400 years ago.
You're using words a little different.
Yeah, so the meaning of the English word has changed.
Yeah.
So I think both of those translations get at an aspect of what the teacher's trying to say. I always hate to do this because I never want to erode people's confidence in English translations because they're great. But there are cases where they're translations and they can't fully communicate everything that the Hebrew author wants to communicate. And this is one of those times where
That would be a really interesting podcast is figuring out the history of why these were translated this way. I don't know. I just got really interested in
Yeah, well, for English, it always goes back to Tyndale.
Tyndale.
And then Tyndale had influence over what was called the Geneva Bible and then the King James.
Okay.
Were the two main.
But there's got to be a story of that moment where they're like looking at this
Hebrew
word and they're making a decision.
Yes.
Because they know what the word is, and you're about to tell us what the Hebrew word is more literally. Mm-hmm. So they must have been wrestling with that.
Yeah, for sure they did. And also, and this is not to be prideful or anything, but their understanding of Hebrew was 500 years old.
Yeah.
And
wasn't as complete.
Yeah, so like the study of ancient Hebrew over the last half a millennia, I mean, it's progressed enormously, just like our understanding of science and the universe has progressed. And so
at that point, Hebrew wasn't a spoken language at all.
Wasn't spoken anymore as biblical Hebrew, and the wealth of ancient Hebrew texts and cousin languages to Hebrew hadn't been discovered and studied yet.
Okay.
So just we have a better understanding of Hebrew than we did 400 years ago, and a lot of the translation differences that happen in modern translations are based on more recent scholarship.
So Tyndale, he's reading this, he's got to make a decision, and he goes with meaningless. No, he goes with vanity. Vanity, which back then we don't even know what.
Well, yeah, the English word vanity. I think it means. I think it essentially means what meaningless does in modern English.
Oh, really? Okay, let's see.
But you tell me.
Futile or worthless, from Old French, vanité, self-conceit, futility, lack of resolve. From Latin, vanitatum, emptiness, aimlessness, falsity.
Mm-hmm.
But then figuratively, it became about foolishness and pride. So even back then, it kind of had that sense of foolishness.
Both of those, yeah.
Both of those.
So I would humbly suggest that we just go back to the source.
Yeah.
And
go to the Hebrew.
Yeah, go to the Hebrew word. The Hebrew word's simple to say. It's not hard to pronounce. Hevel. Hevel. He. It's technically the letter B of the Hebrew alphabet, but it pronounces like a V. So Hevel. And its most basic meaning is smoke or vapor. In Psalm 144, the poet says, "Lord, what are human beings that you care about them? They are like Hevel. Their days are like a fleeting shadow." So the idea is human beings here today, gone tomorrow, they're like a wisp of smoke. And then the next line, they're like a fleeting shadow. So the shadow moves from the morning down all the way to, across, and then it's gone. When the sun sets, your shadow disappears. So the point is fleeting, temporary, but it's smoke. That it's a wisp of smoke that you see it, and then it's gone. So that's its most basic meaning of Hevel is a wisp of smoke or vapor.
Or shadow.
Shadow is just in Psalm 144. It's the next poetic line, which uses a different word and different metaphor. But the point is that at its most basic meaning, it's a wisp of smoke that's temporary. It's here and it looks solid. You're like, oh, there it is. That's smoke, and then gone.
And do you think back then it also then meant figuratively? What would be another good word, like futile or?
Well, we'll get there. That's where the teacher's going to apply this word and bring out a nuance of meaning that is not very common, but it's going to be one of the main meanings.
Like,
is
this very poetic? Like, at this point, are people going to be like, oh, I've never really thought of that, the life like Hevel, or is that going to have already become part of
No,
language?
It's very common. Yeah, so Job, chapter 7, he says, I despise my life, my suffering. I wish I wasn't alive. My days are like Hevel. Yeah, the psalm says, slaves and the poor, their lives are like Hevel in the world.
Okay.
Isaiah 57. Idols. This is actually in Isaiah and in Jeremiah. Their word to describe idol statues is hevel. So there, it's not necessarily that they're temporary, but they seem to be solid and offer you something real.
But it's empty.
You pray to your idol, and then nothing happens.
I love that metaphor. I love that image. We don't have anything quite like it, do we?
No. Well, I mean, vapor.
I guess I think I understand now more
An illusion?
why meaningless gets there, because it's like you think there's meaning there.
Yes. Yeah.
You think there's something of substance there, but then it goes away.
Yes. So I think there's any word in any language can have different nuances of meaning. So at its most basic, it means temporary or fleeting. Like in the verses we just read of it's here today, the slave and the poor person, or my life, I'm a mortal human. So in chapter 11 of Ecclesiastes is a poem about death, and a long one. And so in chapter 11, verse 8, the teacher says, listen, however many years somebody is going to live, you should enjoy them, because you should remember the days of darkness, they're coming, and everything to come is hevel. So his point is you're young and you're youthful and your body works great, but remember, it's hevel. It's here today, gone tomorrow, because the days of darkness are coming. So your youth and energy and health, it's fleeting. It's hevel. It doesn't mean it's meaningless.
Sure.
It means it's not going to be around forever. It's going to be here and then whoosh.
And whether or not you think there's meaning in that is another question.
Correct. It's only about time. That's the time factor. Here today, gone tomorrow. Your youth, your health, your life.
But if you're talking about an idol and you're calling it hevel,
yes, right.
then you would go, oh, so there's no meaning in that idol.
Yes. Yeah.
There's no, and so then the word.
So this is what I would call the second nuance.
Okay.
That the teacher taps into when he uses the word hevel. He uses the word 38 times in this short 12-chapter book. He's using it constantly. Yeah. And most of the times, doesn't use it to mean fleeting or temporary. He uses it to mean, the way Michael Fox, my doctoral advisor, he thought the best English word to capture it is absurd.
There you go.
Or I've come to prefer the word enigma or paradox. So here's a couple examples.
So wait a second, sorry. You just went to great lengths to say hevel means like the vapor or something that like it doesn't last. And now you're saying in this book, it actually is more talking about another aspect of it, which is not whether it lasts, but whether it makes sense.
The teacher's a brilliant wordsmith. And so he's using a word that's capable of a couple of different nuances of meaning. And sometimes he'll use it to mean fleeting or temporary. Like
in the beginning here.
You're young. In chapter 11, you're young, you have youth, but the days of darkness are coming, your life's hevel. But he doesn't bring out that temporary nuance of the word in all of those 38 uses. In fact, that's a minority of how he uses the word. The majority of the times he uses the word, he means something different if you read the word in context.
So give me an example.
So chapter 6, verse 1. God allows some people to have wealth and possessions and honor so that they lack nothing that their hearts desire.
It's nice of God.
But God doesn't always grant them the ability to enjoy them. And then one day, some stranger's going to enjoy them instead. This is hevel. Or chapter 8, verse 14. Here's something hevel that occurs in the land. Righteous people get what wicked people deserve, and wicked people get what righteous people deserve. This, I say, is hevel. So what he doesn't mean is temporary. He actually means the opposite. He's saying this is happening all the time.
Yeah.
This isn't just happening one time.
This is a reality.
This is a reality that's ongoing and constant.
But it's a reality that he wants to use the same word, which means like
smoke or vapor.
Vapor, smoke. So like there's a disorientingness to it. There's a...
Here's my way of saying it is, it's similar to the idols that smoke is real. Like when you see a cloud of smoke, you look at it and go, oh, that's a thing.
Yeah.
Look at it. I can
Right.
see it. I can point at it just like I can point to a rock or a door
Mm-hmm.
and see that's a thing.
Yeah.
But smoke has this unique quality that when I reach out my hands
Right.
to grab onto it,
Yeah.
there's nothing there.
Yeah.
When I reach out to grab a rock, it's solid, it's there.
Yeah. It's kind
But-
of like when you're looking at fog. Like if you're above the fog line, you're looking at it. It looks like this nice blanket.
Yeah, clouds, like clouds.
Like clouds.
Yeah, like when you're a kid, you look up at the clouds and you wish you could go lay on one.
Right. Or you're above the clouds and you look down on a plane and it looks like really soft but
Yeah.
then when you're in the fog driving
Yes.
around,
Yeah,
it just looks like a haze. It's
That's right.
like in your
yeah,
yeah.
Hevel.
It's hevel.
Hevel. So here I am living my life, and I work at a real estate company, and it seems like telling the truth
Right.
ought to bring me success because
Right.
it's the right thing to do, and that's justice, and that's good, and I can count on it. It's real. We're not making up justice. We all
Yeah.
want it to happen.
Right.
You know? We all
We
know
want
that-
everyone else to be honest with us.
Yeah, totally. And we all know what justice looks like when we see it happen. It's the right thing. But then I go out and I do the right thing, and
I'm punished for it.
I'm punished for it, and I lose out.
Yeah.
It's hevel. And what he doesn't mean is, therefore, everything's meaningless. What he means is, I don't get that. It seems like justice is real. We can all know it. But sometimes when justice is done, good things don't happen. Bad things happen. That's hevel. That's why I think the word absurd
Yeah.
or enigma or paradox, because what the teacher isn't saying is, I know all the answers and I declare to you that life is meaningless.
Mm.
What he's saying is, I've discovered there's a glitch in the system.
Yeah.
And things that I thought were certain and true aren't always certain and true. And that's the definition of paradox. It's not contradiction.
Well, now,
It's
couldn't he have used a word that more literally means riddle or paradox or enigma? I mean, there's got to be another Hebrew word.
Sure, but he chose this image and metaphor that I think once you get it.
So instead of using maybe a more straightforward word like absurd,
logic-oriented term.
logic-oriented, he decided, well, we're running with this word hevel.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, it means smoke or vapor, but sometimes poetically can mean
Temporary.
Yeah,
My
there's a-
life is hevel.
life is hevel.
Here
so-
today, gone tomorrow.
But I'm going to take that language and now I'm going to push it further and say the wisdom of the Proverbs has hevel to it because it doesn't always seem to work out. And so now let's live in this metaphor and like in the same way that idol, when you reach out and it just dissipates, like even when you reach out and try to do the right thing and fear God and all this stuff, there's still that sense to it as well. And it's disorienting. You're in the fog. You don't have the answers. It's not clear why. It's confusing. It's hevel.
Yeah, it's hevel. So he's innovating. He's using an existing word that has this possibility of nuance of meaning it's not real or it doesn't work out, and then he pushes it.
Sure, well, poets do this all the time.
And poets do this all the time. Yeah, they'll use a word but in a different way and context, and then
that becomes, if it becomes a popular poem or a popular thought, then it just becomes part of the vernacular.
That's
People
right.
use that word that way.
yeah.
So I'm curious, did he do this, or was this word already used this way and he's just running with it?
And so that's about, that's a complex question about the development of words, meanings, and so on. What we can see is in the prophets, this idea of hevel as not temporary, but as seeming real, but then just an illusion. They use the word hevel to apply that idea to idols. And the teacher is using that nuance of hevel and applying it to all of life and wisdom and righteousness.
Isn't this really scandalous, though, from a Jewish point of view, in which it's like God said, here's what I promise you, and he will do it as long as you uphold your end of the bargain. And so that's like keeping the commandments. And then this wisdom of the Proverbs runs with that and says, yeah, in fact, you can apply God's wisdom to all these areas in life and things will go well for you. And so when things aren't going well, it's because you've been making a mistake and you haven't been holding up your end of the bargain. But then you get this book and he like turns that on its head.
Yes. Well, that's true, but it's not scandalous maybe the way it is to modern Christians from a certain background. In many ways, it's very Jewish.
So it wouldn't have been scandalous to a Jew.
Yeah, a better way to say that is the Bible contains within itself these words and a story from God, but then the Hebrew Bible specifically has also within itself the human response to that. So the book of Psalms is prayers, for the most part, people's words to God. Some of them thanking God for his awesomeness and what he does. And then a whole bunch of them are saying, like, wait a minute, this isn't working out. What's happening? God, I'm angry. Dang it, why don't you do something? And so that's a whole part of the Bible, is people getting angry at God and venting their emotion. And so here is another example of within God's word to his people is a human voice saying, wait a minute, it doesn't always work out the way Proverbs said it would, and that human word becomes part of God's word to his people. And so within Jewish culture, as it goes on, throughout history, really has always contained well, I think, this dialogue and tension of perspectives.
Yeah.
It's contained within the Bible itself.
That continues on in the tradition of the...
Yeah, so the Mishnah and the Talmud, these are discussions about how to live out the laws of the Torah. But it'll be a whole chapter on how to obey the Sabbath. And the chapter just contains the perspective of 18 different rabbis.
Right.
And doesn't tell you what to conclude.
Yeah.
It just gives you the perspective of 18 different rabbis.
That's a very Jewish thing, is to allow for the tension within your tradition.
Yes, and the book of the book of Ecclesiastes does that so well with the two voices, because the author says, "Listen to the words of this teacher, but listen." He's going to give an orthodox conclusion.
And then there's me as like a modern Western Christian who goes, "Wait a second. How can this be in the Bible?"
Right.
Because that's not from my tradition, where you I never went to church and one guy gets up and he's like, "Hey, so here's, how to follow Jesus, and here's like what you should think about this thing going on in the world right now." And then another guy gets up and goes, "Cool, that was nice, but I think following Jesus means this, and this is what you should think about this current event." And then you go away from that service going, okay, what do I do? That never happens. That never, ever happens. So Ecclesiastes has this sense to it of what do I do with this?
And what you do with it is you listen to it, then you go listen to Job, and then you have 3 different perspectives on how to live well in God's good world. And hopefully you've listened to all of them honestly with an open mind, and you will be a wiser, better human if you take all 3 of them seriously. I think that's the point. This is stereo.
It's so different.
Stereo is 2 things coming at you, right? From
Sure.
stereo?
Yeah.
So what's 3 things?
Dolby surround sound.
Dolby surround sound. Yeah, that's the wisdom books are Dolby surround sound.
There's 5 things, I think.
Yeah, anyhow.
Yeah, that's a good image. That's just different. I mean, it's very different than it makes me think of Scripture differently. I think I come from let's boil it down to a systematic theology, which is like the book that gives you the answers. And the way that you're saying the wisdom literature in particular written is, I'm going to give you 3 different books with 3 different points of view, and that's the answer for you. The answer is you living in tension between all 3 of these books.
Yes, and they don't contradict each other. They complement each other. Because Proverbs actually never said, this is airtight and how it will always
It
work.
kind of feels that way.
Yeah, but
You read it, and you walk away, and you
Sure,
feel that way.
Sure. However, it's a book of Proverbs. Like the form of the book itself
Yes.
is a proverb, not
Right.
not as I said, it's
The
the book
genre.
of Proverbs, not the book of promises.
Right.
And so Ecclesiastes comes along and says, it's not airtight, and here's a whole bunch of examples. And how do you reckon and live with that? And the teacher's conclusion isn't, therefore go be a relativist or a hedonist, He's actually still going to say it's better to be wise and fear God.
Yeah.
But you should adjust your expectations.
Yeah.
So that your worldview isn't shattered when horrible things happen to you for doing the right thing. So yeah, and that's the significant point of why I think meaningless is not a helpful translation, because meaningless makes you think, oh, here's the authoritative conclusion.
Right.
There is no meaning. And that's not what he's saying. What he's saying is, enigma. There are some things that happen in life that are just a true glitch in the system, and you don't know why.
You're not going to be able to figure it out.
You're not going to be able to figure it out.
Which is it's related then to what God says to Job.
It's very similar to Job, except with Job, we are given a window into the heavens and a bit more understanding of why something happens to somebody, even though we don't actually really get the full answer.
Yeah. Even though it still leaves you with a ton of questions.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that when we get to Job. But Ecclesiastes is just saying the system doesn't always work perfectly, the wisdom and fear of the Lord system, and you're not going to be able to figure it out. It's hevel. It's real, but it's also not always real in a particular circumstance.
There's a kind of an agnosticism about it in some ways. Not in that he doesn't say there's no God or that there's things, but he's saying there's plenty that we can't know.
Yeah, there are going to be things that you can't know. And listen, we're just at verse 2 of the book, so that's not where he ends. It's where he begins. Because he's going to have a lot of recommendations about how you deal with that and how you live well in God's world, even knowing that things are hevel.
Talk about this first example. I just think it's so interesting.
The first example?
6:1 of the paradox. God gives some people wealth, possessions, and honor so that they lack nothing their hearts desire. First of all, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Everything my heart desires, I get. Wealth, possessions, honor. I'm just stoked. God gave that to some people.
Yeah. Yeah, they get it. They get all that they wish and wanted for.
Which is, I think, what everyone really is kind of longing for. You're longing for, I just want to have the stuff I need. I want to have people respect me. I want to be taken care of because my heart is always longing for things. And if I had the stuff, then my heart would be satiated.
Yes.
And God has given that to some people.
Well,
is that what he's saying? Is this just a thought experiment?
But the sentence goes on.
Well, the sentence goes on. But can we just stop right there?
Oh, yeah.
If you're a king, you kind of have that in a sense.
Yes.
You got everything you would need. Everyone is supposed to respect you. Like if you're a celebrity,
I think he's playing into perception here.
Okay. So he's not saying...
Because it's not the end of the sentence. He plays into perception that some people have wealth, possession, honor, and everything they want, they get.
Yeah.
But this actually is chapter 6. It's a culmination of a line of thought that started back in chapter 2, is that even people who get those things, paradoxically, hate their lives.
Yeah.
And,
which is so true a lot of times.
Yes, and how all that they had to go through to acquire all of that stuff, by the time they have it all, they're stressed out and can't sleep at night and old.
Yeah.
And exhausted. So he finishes and says, they lack nothing their hearts desire, but those are the same people usually that God hasn't granted an ability to enjoy them because they had to kill themselves to get all this.
Yeah.
And then they die.
And someone else enjoys it.
And all of their wealth goes on to irresponsible trust fund kids or whatever, like on to somebody else. And strangers get to benefit from everything that they worked for. But the person who worked for it, dies because of ulcers.
Or even when they're alive. Like it's
Or even-
other people
Yes, that's right.
get to enjoy
Yeah.
the things that they've accomplished.
So he says, here's an example where somebody worked hard, feared the Lord, was wise, got all this stuff. They lacked nothing their hearts desire, but their life actually became miserable to them through acquiring all of that. And then they didn't even truly get to enjoy it. Other people enjoy it.
Yeah.
That's hevel.
Yeah.
It's hevel. It's like somebody lived by Proverbs 3. You know? I was
Yeah.
like, I trust the Lord.
Well, you told me
got
a
health,
story
wealth,
about
wise.
that. Someone that we know who got really famous, got all this money, but was an upright dude and just was killing it. He's just writing books and whatever. And then we find out, you tell me he's actually really, really depressed and is now addicted to whatever and now blah, blah, blah. It'd be like, oh my goodness, what a bummer. And why? How did, it really is gut wrenching to know that man, you had it, had it made. And then you went and gambled this way or you went and did that.
Yeah. Or you just weren't able to enjoy it because of,
or you're just depressed.
Yeah, the mindset that your accomplishments.
And then it would be frustrating. You'd be like, why does it have to be that way? There's and there wouldn't be a clear answer.
Yes.
But,
he's wealth, possessions, honor. Those are the very things that Proverbs said you would get by living wise.
And here you are,
fearing
you have
the
them.
Lord, and you've got them, and you hate your life.
And you can't enjoy it.
Yeah, it's hevel. Again, it's not meaningless. That's a paradox.
Yeah.
That's not how the system's supposed to work. You're supposed to...
It's a troubling kind of glitch that the Proverbs didn't expose.
And notice he says, God gives some people this. So this is how it works out sometimes.
Right.
Some people have wealth, possessions, honor, and it's great. They have big families, and they're happy and die at a ripe old age, but not everybody. So again, Proverbs doesn't give you the exceptions to the rule. And Ecclesiastes comes and says, let's talk about those exceptions.
Yeah, right.
Because they expose that things aren't as black and white as you thought. They're hevel. It's a paradox, which is different than a contradiction. I think you hear meaningless and you say, oh, it's a contradiction. Life has no meaning. And
it's a contradiction in the biblical worldview where life has meaning because God created it with a purpose. So there's meaning to life.
Yeah, but a contradiction means I know because I've surveyed all the data and know this is a genuine contradiction in the world.
These can't exist together.
Right. And that's different than paradox. Paradox is saying, from my vantage point, with the limited data and perspective I have, I can't see how these two things go together.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean they're not reconcilable. It just means I can't reconcile them, but I'm not God, and I think that's what the teacher's trying to say. From here under the sun, which is a phrase he uses 28 times, here, humans who are not transcendent and above all, we look at life and what we see is paradox. Sometimes.
From our vantage point under the sun,
Yeah.
we can't discern why these things are happening this way.
Just because I can't see meaning in something that happens in my life doesn't mean there isn't meaning. It just means I don't have the perspective to see what it is.
And you might never have that perspective.
And you most likely will never have that perspective. Like Job never got that perspective. And like the teacher. The book is not trying to make you into an atheist. The book's trying to make you a humble theist, a humble fear of God, to know that you should fear God, keep his commandments, as the author says at the end, but don't expect that everything's always going to work out for you. Tragedies will happen. Things won't work out. And it doesn't mean that God's not good. It just means that life is full of paradoxes under the sun. And that humbles you, and then that forces you to say, well, then what are my motives for pursuing the good life if there's so much hevel?
I beside you will remain. I'll remind you of the day.
That's the end of part 1 in our conversation of Ecclesiastes. In the next episode, we'll continue this conversation and we'll dive into the specific arguments that the teacher makes to prove that the world is in fact hevel. We make videos and we put them on YouTube. This conversation is going to be turned into a short animated video that explains the wisdom of Ecclesiastes, and it will be out in the summer of 2016. We also have out an animated overview of Proverbs. Really love it. It came out beautifully. Then we'll finish off that series with an overview of Job that will come out in the fall. We also have a lot of other videos. We have outlines of every book of the Bible in a Read Scripture series. Those are all on YouTube. You can find them at youtube.com/thebibleproject. You could download them for free off of our website, use them in church, school, at home with your families, any way that you want to use them. We're on Twitter at JoinBibleProj and on Facebook, facebook.com/thebibleproject. Say hi to us. We'll catch you next time. Thanks for being a part of this with us.
Never